Willkommen zurück. Stellen Sie sich vor, die Nachrichten in der Tagesschau werden künftig nur noch von einem Computer ausgewählt oder die Süddeutsche Zeitung veröffentlicht künftig nur noch Artikel, die auf Daten basiert sind und die dann automatisch auch noch ausgewählt worden sind. Sie glauben, das ist unvorstellbar. Scott Smith, der nächste Gast, der sagt, das wird schon so kommen, denn er ist Futurist und beschäftigt sich damit, wie sich Roboter bzw. wie Computer unsere Gesellschaft verändern. Sein letztes Projekt war, er hat eine Zeitung der Zukunft erstellt, eine Zeitung, die nur auf computerbasierten Informationen ist. Hier ist Scott Smith.
Thank you very much, and thanks for bearing with the delay. For talking about information, I want to make sure my data is correct. So March 17th of this year, a couple of months ago, about 6:25 in the morning, California time, there was an earthquake detected at about 9 kilometers below what is basically Beverly Hills, California, where all of the rich and beautiful people live, not me. This particular earthquake was interesting for a few reasons. The first reason is it was the strongest detected earthquake in the Los Angeles basin, the Los Angeles area, for a number of years. And of course, living in Los Angeles, people worry about earthquakes. So this was exciting, to say the least. It was also very early in the morning, and it was also on a holiday in the United States, on St. Patrick's Day. But what was really unusual about this 4.4 Richter scale earthquake was not the fact that it happened and who it affected, but it was how it was reported. So at 6:38 in the morning, the earthquake happens, and within about 6 minutes, the U.S. Geological Survey, which is the government body that tracks seismic activity and earthquake activity, basically sent a tweet saying that there had been earthquake activity. And almost immediately after, this gentleman, Ken Schwenke, who works for the Los Angeles Times, posted the tweet about earthquakes, which is often in America the first way we know we've had an earthquake. And also the link to the story underneath. You'll see that it was, reporting now 4.7 adjusted data, hashtag quake, earthquake, and the LA Times local link. And the story that emerged was quite short. I remember seeing the headline, and even though I don't live in Los Angeles, I clicked on it because I have friends who live there, and I wanted to see the information. And this was the story that came up. And it looks very normal, shallow magnitude earthquake, aftershock. After the original earthquake, the U.S. Geological Survey is reporting a trembler occurred at 7:23 Pacific time. The epicenter of the aftershock was 5 miles from Beverly Hills. In the last 10 days, there's been one earthquake of 3.0 or greater. And the very bottom line, there's something kind of interesting hidden down there. And it says, this information comes from the USGS Earthquake Notification Service. And this post was created by an algorithm written by an author. We have these kind of stories go by all the time, but suddenly this story got noticed. And throughout the day, there were frequent updates of the data, no injuries, no damage to property, nothing else. But unusually, the press picked up on this last sentence. What does that mean? This post was written by an algorithm. And effectively what happened was Mr. Schwenke had written a script, a computer script that he called QuakeBot, and it automatically takes any data coming from the government earthquake service of 3.0 magnitude or greater and turns it into a text story, already formatted. It adds a map, sets a headline, sends it on to the content management system of the Los Angeles Times, at which point a human takes that story, looks at it, adds a couple of words, but only a few, and then sends it on its way. That's a little bit strange. He had created this algorithm basically as a project just to see if he could do it, because this kind of data comes into the newsroom quite frequently. And if you look at something very similar, this isn't his script, but it's a similar one, you can see the blue letters basically are the blue words are the facts. If you watch these old police movies from the 1940s and 50s, the policeman will say, just the facts, man. So what they really needed in the newsroom were just the facts delivered by an algorithm and then inserted into sentences that made sense. And then we kind of have a sense of what this looks like. So you have location, you have distance, you have damage, you have the number of earthquakes, and every time there was an aftershock, the system could automatically update itself. And this is, as I said, not unusual. It's not expensive. It's not complicated. Many other people have written similar scripts, but the fact that the LA Times had used this to basically create what became a headline story, it was the most popular news story in the newspaper for several days. Now, if you work in the print media business, that should give you a little chill. I hear a few, right? Okay. So, but everyone else thinks, I'm safe, because I don't deal with facts. But this is something that's quite easy to implement, and of course, in the executive suite, the people who are managing the budget at the Los Angeles Times think, oh, fantastic, I don't need to pay that guy or that woman, you know, $30,000 a year to be an entry-level journalist anymore. We can just have Twitter and you know, Microsoft Word and a script create this for us. And the number of national news stories that were written about it were quite extraordinary, and I think showed not so much how important the story was to the rest of us and outside of the media business, but how important it was inside the media business and how many people got kind of agitated and excited about it. But as I said, they're not the only ones doing this. This is actually a company called Narrative Sciences that for several years now has had a couple of technical products that do a very similar thing, probably in a much more complex way. They're not writing a 4-paragraph, very short news report. They're basically taking financial market data and business data and removing people like me 20 years ago when my very first job was working in a business newsletter, taking company earnings, taking financial data, taking management information, and trying to write an interesting story. You know, I read The Economist every day, tried to learn the Financial Times, The Guardian, tried to learn how the great business writers write, and then I would use floral language, you know, very sort of fluffy, excited language to report very basic business information. I could get away with that. It was 1992. But now we have a company that basically can do that automatically. It takes a feed of data, research, analyst reports, data providers, sports data, crunches it down and gives you a product that's just what you need to know with all of the extra words put inside. And this product is commercially available. There are different services using it, and you've now got a situation where companies are beginning to adopt it. There have been researchers who have asked the public to review this information and decide, like, you know, taking 2 drinks and say which one is Coke and which is Pepsi, you know, which one is the real person and which one is the robot. The vast majority of them can't tell in a basic news story what the difference is. They just think it's the same thing. But it's not just the kind of boring market data that we may or may not be interested in. One of the first things many of us do if we're interested in sport is pull up the sports results the next morning after a game or that night, or you're checking Twitter or Facebook to find out who won the game, who won the match. And these companies, they're, again, companies like Narrative Science, are able to do the exact same thing with sports results. They can know what the flow of an average match report is going to look like, take all of the critical data, begin to weave it in, and generate a sufficiently complicated story about what happened in that game or that match to satisfy the need. So you no longer have to send someone out to freeze in the cold on a Saturday night or Sunday to watch a match or sit in the rain. You can stay in the dry building, wait for it all to be over, push the button, and the story is written. And those of you who read, particularly I notice this in football and soccer reports, often you'll see the reporter's written the whole story except for the last half hour of the match. And so 80% of the story will be all of the kind of interactions on the sideline, the managers arguing with each other, people shouting at the players, the fans excited, and then the last half of the game, if it's late, will just be summarized very quickly because he wanted to go home and take a hot bath before going to bed. So, so we have simple things like earthquake data, we have financial data, we have sports data kind of being replaced. Now, this isn't widespread yet, but it's an attractive proposition. There are more than a few companies in the marketplace, when I just did a basic bit of research, that are basically in this line of work. And the more data scientists we are churning out of universities and people who are familiar with algorithms, the more people who are doing semantic analysis of language, which, because of things like Google and search engines and the semantic web, we have more and more people who have expertise in isolating language and understanding meaning and putting it into a particular format. So where else could this go? If you use a Kindle, do any of you actually have a Kindle, read books, like books? So if you have a Kindle, if you choose to, you can sign up to basically have your account take all of the passages that you've highlighted with your hand or your finger in the book and store them somewhere. Maybe so you can remember what important lines were there and you don't have to put a marker on your screen. But also, if you're reading a Kindle book these days and you have that feature turned on, you can see where other people have found something interesting in that book. So it gives us a kind of social sense of what we like when we're reading. That's fantastic, that's interesting. I found it a little strange when I first opened my Kindle and I see it looks like someone else has already drawn in or written in my book, but that's cool. I'll go with it, it's innovation. But one thing you can do with that is begin to realize what are the most interesting parts of books for everyone that's reading. You no longer have to wait for someone to leave a recommendation on Amazon. You can take that book, get the data that comes from Amazon, push it together, mash it up, and find out what people found most interesting about that book. And what's the easiest thing to do then? Write a book review. Or don't write a book review, let the book review write itself. So, for example, a company that I write for, Quartz, recently took that data from Kindle and basically wrote an article showing the, there it is, highlighting the key passages that people found the most interesting. So this is a new kind of book review that doesn't really insert the reviewer or the critic's ideas and opinions, but is simply, again, like the earthquake, reporting the facts. This is the most interesting part of the book because this is what people said they liked the most. And all you end up having to do is write some text in the middle that basically glues, like a sandwich, all of those different highlights together, and presto, you have a book review. So we still haven't displaced all the journalists and all the writers, but we're slowly eating our way from the sports desk and the weather desk and the environmental desk into the business desk, into the arts and cultural part of the publication, and we continue on, right? But the editors think, it's cool, I'm safe, I'm an editor, I've worked for 20 years in this business, I have critical judgment that tells me how to put a newspaper together, how to write stories, and how to give people entertaining, hard-hitting, factual information that will keep them coming back and either buying my newspaper or visiting my website and clicking on the advertising so I can keep a house and keep a job. Except that termite, that bug, keeps eating its way higher and higher. Recently, at the Milan Design Festival, Joseph Grima and a company called Space Caviar, which I think is the best company name of the year. I want to taste Space Caviar. Space Caviar built this machine called FOMO. And if you know the acronym FOMO, fear of missing out, I think it was an ironic name. They built this machine basically to sit at the event and take a combination of speaker presentations, a couple of images from each presentation, quotes from the speaker because they were recording and analyzing this, the audio, taking people's tweets, images other people have captured of the speakers at the event, and producing an almost real-time newspaper so that you could go downstairs after the talks. They're already making notes of what to do next year. Go downstairs after the talks and pick up a newspaper, print it out fresh of the event you just left. So when you go back to your office and your boss says, what did you do today? Did you just hang out at the conference? You can say, no, here's all the proceeds of it. This is the information right here. Instantaneous, real-time reporting about conferences. Very cool. Probably not easy to duplicate quickly now, but give it 6 months. And it's pretty simple. This has a solar panel. It's kind of self-funding. You can plug it into multiple types of voltage. You've got various types of printers. All it needs is to listen to what we're doing and generate that. Is that great for me? It means I have to give more interesting presentations. That is harder and harder for a robot to understand, but isn't so difficult and kind of strange that the hardworking translators in the back of the room can't do their jobs right. I study to be a translator, so I can sympathize. But this isn't just a one-off project. You see a theme here, right? This isn't just a one-off project. The Guardian newspaper started last year working with a group called the Newspaper Club in London, who figured out how to basically print on-demand short runs of newspapers. And they created something called, ironically, the long good read. I unfortunately left my copy of it back in my hotel, but I have one with me, and it's designed to basically follow this process throughout the day, or throughout the week. It is a script that can crunch reader comments, all of the articles, unique browsing visits, all of the words that are in there, basically take everything that comes into that newspaper throughout the week digitally, not just what they're sending out, but what's coming back at them as response about those articles. And they can crunch that down and quickly produce, and increasingly not have to have a physical human editor lay out that publication and print it. Interestingly, they print it on a Sunday, deliver it to coffee shops, and people can lie in bed and take their time casually and slowly absorbing the best stories of the week from The Guardian that they may have had a hand in determining what's in that newspaper because they were visiting the site or commenting. So as we were just talking about before I stepped on the stage, we have this incredibly fast process. Doesn't involve people, high speed, algorithmic, computational, and then suddenly at the other end, it spits out a physical, old-school artifact for people to take their time and enjoy if they don't work at the newspaper. Or they might have a lot of time if they work at the newspaper. But this is not a hard thing to do now. You can actually print a weekly newspaper. So they've taken it one step farther. I was having a conversation with the guys who work at Newspaper Club a few weeks ago, and they were describing to me this new idea they had called Open 001, and the idea was going to be to go one step further than the long good read, which still involves the Guardian editors doing a little bit of curation and choosing and fitting it together. They thought, well, let's try an experiment that can actually kind of produce this thing with practically no one involved. So the first issue of Open 001 is out. They're testing things, tweaking them, trying to sort of see how it works. But effectively, instead of having like Flipboard or Zeit or Pulse or Facebook Paper, whatever your favorite aggregator is on your mobile phone or on your iPad, that's now been physicalized into the instrument of a newspaper that you can hold in your hands. I thought it was interesting that the first story that came out was about how to resign. Maybe it's a message from the computer, I don't know. So where are we in all of this? We're the consumers of this information. How do we feel about it? As I said before, given some testing, many people couldn't determine the difference between the computer-written story and the human-written story, but obviously that wasn't a 2,000-word in-depth treatment of human interest and love lost and betrayal and crime and intrigue, the type of thing you make an independent film from, right? Luckily, there's still people around who can do that kind of writing and do all of the investigation and think creatively about how to frame that. But as ever, there are clever scientists and clever researchers and clever university students who think, why don't we try and figure this out? And so in this particular case, here's a group from Stony Brook University in the United States, in New York State, that basically pumped thousands of books from the Gutenberg Project, which is an open source book project, into databases, did a lot of experimentation, wrote some scripts, and essentially determined what makes a book successful. And in their interpretation, it's a combination of something they called interestingness. I don't know if that's a joke, but interestingness, so do you find this sort of interesting? Novelty. But we know from the Amazon example of highlighting things what people find interesting, so we're beginning to get a sense of that. The style of writing, is it clear? How engaging the storyline is, And then I think they tried to calculate luck as well. Did the author's husband know a publisher, wife have a friend at the publishing company? Did something else, or did it just happen to be a perfect timing for a novel about vampires? But they determined basically, kind of algorithmically, what constitutes a successful book, and at least for them. Is it perfect? Probably not. We need to find an algorithm that tells us what's a perfect research project. So maybe we can replace the university students. But in the meantime, it gives people enough information to go off and create another process to try to abstract these books down. And I know for a fact, having being married to an art director who worked in publishing and having friends who've worked in publishing, that they will tell you that there are meetings with editors, some of you may be in them, will sit down and say, this is what sold really well last year. It has cats on the front cover. It cost this much. It was a brown cover. It came out in the spring, probably April. This thick, certain kind of pages, that's what sells. People know how to take data about products and product popularity and translate that into something else, and kind of leaving aside the issues of creativity. But why stop with books? Why not do art? So far, we've just been taking work away from people who sit at keyboards all day. But why not go after the painters as well? So, as always, there's a university team. In this case, it's at University of Trento in Italy, examined dozens and dozens of abstract paintings to find out what moves us, what makes us feel emotional, and what makes us respond to a painting. And they essentially looked at the painting techniques, similar to the writing, the painting techniques, the textures, the colors, the arrangement. But in this case, they also measured how what were the responses of the people looking at those paintings. What is the output of these types of experiments? We're able to write better scripts to essentially generate creativity. Generate creativity of an acceptable level that people will find it passable. So we used to have this kind of unusual, arrangement of you had the observer, that could be the writer, the journalist, the filmmaker, the photographer, the artist, etc., who took their impressions of the world, took information that they brought in, processed it, created a work of creativity, even if it's just a story about corporate earnings. There's a little creativity in there. There should be. And deliver it to an editor, a director, a publisher, someone who can actually shape that into product, and then they give it to us, the consumer. But we're now moving quite rapidly from this very kind of generic process, of traditional process at the top, to what's at the bottom, which is you can put a sensor of some kind, whether it's something reading data, sensing the temperature, finding an earthquake, downloading a sports score, whatever that sensor might be, that piece of technology that takes in information. We establish a certain kind of filter that's adjusted for the semantics understanding of the user. And then we don't deliver it to a reader, an art lover, a poetry enjoyer, someone who's consuming creativity. We increasingly deliver it to a device that can also measure feedback, that can measure our responses to that creativity. And this is really kind of shifting the game. And again, these stories are kind of happening around the edge of the media world and of the creative world, but part of my role is seeing kind of what's happening out there that doesn't really seem important yet, but when you start to find 2, 3, 4, 5 examples, you start to kind of have the species interbreed, mix, hybridize, and start to populate the jungle with these new creatures, you realize that 18 months, a year, 2 years have gone by, and suddenly there's a very different playing field, a very different kind of operating environment for doing creativity. Does it always work? Maybe not. Some bright people decided to put sensors on smartphones, have them report back to a central bureau in Boston. Every time the sensor was in someone's pocket or on the dashboard in the car hits a bump. It tells us, or the sensor slows down in traffic. It could report traffic back. It could report where there was road damage, and essentially give us the same kind of data we had at the beginning about earthquakes or about sports matches, and give somebody something to tell about the environment. Except, as often as not, those stories are incorrect. They misattribute the data, or the fact that someone knocked their phone over by accident could suddenly report something that wasn't really happening. So we know that technology is fallible. Data isn't always true. And in particular, we're replacing people who have come up in professional life to be interpreters and to have a certain kind of sixth sense of creativity about how they interpret information, and trying to write a formula that can replace that. We see this happening in sports visually as well. If you think about, if you are like football, for example, increasingly when you have before the match, halftime, after the game, you see something like this. You have the scores, 0-0 and 0-0 in this case, but you also have some other data. You have this numerical data, 51.5 kilometers run by the teams in the first half, 316 passes for one team, 376 for another. They're starting to feed you, as the consumer, the reader, back raw data with a little bit of interpretation. Or we have heat maps. 10 years ago, would you have even known what this meant? But now you've seen enough of them at the bottom that you have a sense, oh, okay, that one image tells me about the activity of the first half of the game. One team was completely in the other team's goal, and someone stayed on defense the whole time. I've just worked on a project that was launched at the National Football Museum in Manchester for a conference called Future Everything, where we explored this. We went 5 years into the future and basically decided to kind of explore what the possible implications of this might be, how it might change the human experience of something we consider to be quite creative, right? The beautiful game, tiki-taka, total football. We have all of these kind of words to describe these various kind of emotional systems and feelings that we have about the game. And just going through that exploration, we realized that the implications and the impact that this kind of algorithms and data and computation can have in a very, very short time on something that's of central cultural importance to us as a society, whether it could be tennis, it could be cycling, anything else. We strip away all of the interpretation, and what we're left with are the very hard facts, the kind of grim data about he did this, he did that. And in effect, it sort of begins to potentially take away the creativity of the teams themselves. We already have these kinds of data teams in football, large football teams themselves, who are talking to the manager and saying, I know you know your players, you know what you want to do, you've done this for 30 years, but if the probability of this player passing to this player against this guy in the rain at night on Thursday is higher than the other, you should tell him to do that. So it begins to take away that kind of freedom and kind of the genius, the inspiration that we think of these players as having, or the coaches as having. And we begin to get a very complex media infrastructure. This is actually part of the installation that was at the museum. It's now in Barcelona as of this week. Attaching kind of nodes to culture and creativity that we hadn't really expected before. So it's not just the journalists or the players. There are all of these intermediary filters in between. And do we even need them? This is a product that was advertised recently by a group in New Zealand that's basically a shirt with sensors in it. And if you're a fan of Australian rules football, you can wear this shirt at home. It will actually detect impacts and collisions of the player that you like, and you will feel like an Xbox controller. You'll feel a thump. So maybe you want to be fans of like a really easygoing player who stays on the bench all the time. But if you love a really hard charging player, then you're going to feel these kind of bumps and thumps on your body. And do you need the person on TV telling you what's going on? You can feel it. There's nothing between you and the data itself. Also a very new product, this is actually a piece of technology called Notch that was introduced in January at CES, the technology conference in Las Vegas. And instead of just wearing one wearable wristband like a Jawbone or a Nike Fuel Band, these sensors can go all over your body and effectively track your movement. So it's almost like motion capture for a video game. So you can find out how that guy moved, or how that skier, when she was going downhill in the Olympics, moved one leg and then the other and adjusted for the snow, et cetera. You can begin to sort of sense that directly. We're removing the need for that interpretation in the middle. If you have a Google phone, an Android phone, and you have a feature on there called Google Now, it will look at your web browsing if you've opted into this. It will look at your searches on your phone. It can also take in information like how you're moving, where you're moving. It can listen to you and hear your voice if you say, OK, Google. and collect information that way. It's there to be a concierge, a butler, to kind of give you information that you want as you want it. And after I researched that project and was looking at lots of different teams and different sports leagues, my phone very quietly started trying to suggest to me that I might still be interested in those things. And so several times when I've been away from the match and I wanted to know the final score, it spoiled it for me. I pick up my phone, I open it, and it's trying to help me. It's trying to be my friend, and it says, guess what? Your team lost. But I have to tell it, no, I don't want to know that, and I don't care about those teams. I know I looked for that product or I looked for that score, but that wasn't real. And we have this, of course, in other parts of our lives as well. Netflix. If you use Netflix or you use Spotify or you use Pandora, their differentiation, the factor that they're using to compete with each other and other companies is their ability to use an algorithm to interpret your interests, your tastes, your desires, without context. But say, if you watch these movies, you'll love this one. I don't know for you, maybe you really like the things that are suggested. I find more often than not, it gives me very strange suggestions, but I'm a very strange person, so I won't hold it against the computer. But these are the things that are becoming these kind of corporate advantages and sort of competitive advantages that companies are using. And surely that data is being fed back into the film industry. It's in some form, because if you have that kind of insight, you will productize it, you will monetize it, right? You will sell those insights to the studios to let them know what's popular. And ultimately, I think what begins to happen is you start to kind of get this funneling of people into more and more of a tight monoculture of what you like and what you don't like, because we also have social pressure suggesting that we watch certain things. But will a computer ever be able to sort of direct a movie? Well, it's already generating a tremendous amount of CGI. If you have a movie like The Hobbit or some film where you're using very high-tech advanced motion capture, there are decisions already being made by the CGI as to how that film is going to look. And obviously the director is determining the level of lighting, et cetera. But over time, wouldn't it be nice if they could just kind of let the scripts do a little bit more of the work for them, because they're very busy people. But we have something like Auto Awesome. What could be better? You have Auto and you have Awesome, the two best things in the world. And this is a part of Google Plus that's been around, I think, for a little over a year now, where if you choose to, Google Plus will take the photos off your phone, your films, your videos, upload them, and also auto-awesomize them. Sorry, translators. They will turn them into a beautiful film, change the filters, do the automatic translation, make it look really nice, and upload it for you. So you don't have to do any of the selection. Your life, filmed, looks awesome, your friends will think you're cool, and there it is. This starts very small, but it begins to kind of work its way along. And over time, we give it feedback, and over time, we kind of give it responses, and we have this kind of sensor to filter to device. It's reading data going back the other way. And this is beginning, obviously this happens in the film business, in the TV business, in the music business. But now, instead of just reading sales data and reading ticket receipts, we can get a much better idea of how people sort of react and respond. But what do we know about that yet? Not much. We still are kind of making very, very flat, simple judgments about creativity. That may be okay if it's not a feedback loop, and it is. It's basically feeding that data back in. The creativity at the other end is being altered. The product is being altered and fed back into the system. And I have a kind of favorite phrase that I try to remember when I'm doing my work, that code is culture and culture is code. And we can talk about this now, but we find in 10 or 15 or years that our kids have kind of grown up with this feedback loop. They're not able to sort of determine one from the other. So what happens? Are we all unemployed? Do we, run screaming from the room, go break the machines, throw the computers out, break our smartphones? We don't know yet. Creativity is always thought that it's going to sort of be immune to what data can do and what technology can do. These are two economists at MIT, Eric Brynjolfsson and Andrew McAfee, and they've written a book called Race Against the Machine, and they basically say, as this technology continues to advance into deeper and deeper areas, that one can imagine in a time and not too distant future, that these jobs are more cheaply done by machines than humans. And all of the people who fund media need to hear is cheaply, profit margin, and they begin to make certain value judgments. So in closing, I think there's a couple of things we can start to sort of look for. Obviously, it's important to know that these things are happening, not to be afraid of them and to run away from them, but to get a sense of how they're happening, where they work, where they don't work, and also how humans can reinsert themselves into the process. We need to be able to teach new skills. As you're coming through design school, more and more I see colleagues, friends, younger friends in design and creative and media sort of education fields that are very, very interested about technology because they're young, it's a new generation, they want to apply these tools, but it's easy to kind of lean into the technology and forget about the more abstract parts of creative culture. We need to remember how to tell creative stories. We need to remember how to tell narratives. Big data is not going to generate creativity no matter how hard we try. It may get incrementally closer, but it's down to us as the people who work in these industries and these businesses to do everything we can to be able to emphasize our own storytelling skills and revisit those if we've let them go. We're not just creators, we're also the consumers of this information. Telling stories together and keeping them whole and not allowing them to be broken up into little pieces to get one click-through or one ad impression. And also remembering to balance creative investment with technology investment. So you hear the story, the line is that, well, if we can replace that reporter here and not have to write about earthquakes, she can go upstairs and work on bigger stories. But does that really happen? If you've taken that salary away from the budget, do you get it back? We have to really think about balancing the creative investment with the technology investment and rewarding creativity as well as efficiency. And I may not be speaking to many of you in the room about this now because you're probably on the creative side. But it's something to kind of take back into your own work and your own lives and roles. How do we reward creativity clearly as well as efficiency? And also, I think lastly, even though we're here at a tech conference, there's a lot of technology going on at Web Week. There's technology everywhere around the world right now. It's hot, it's sexy, it's important, it's interesting. But innovation is not just technology alone. Innovation is not just technology alone. Innovation can also be the heart of creativity. And I think as we kind of begin to feel ourselves moving into this world where more and more technology is able to take over some of these edge capacities and edge capabilities in the creative businesses, we have to kind of keep those thoughts front and center. Otherwise, we're cheating, we're shorting the value of our own creativity and the value of the kind of culture that we generate. Thank you.
Scott Smith, thank you so much for your speech. Gibt es irgendwelche Fragen aus dem Publikum? Einmalige Möglichkeit, einen Futuristen zu befragen.
Sorry for speaking up, Scott. There are two things. First of all, I attended the same earthquake which you've been talking about. Actually, I was in Brea, which was a 5.3 stroke just 3 weeks later. Mm-hmm. And actually, I wrote the first comment on that 20 seconds after it happened.
Right.
So if I have learned from your speech, I'm the last dinosaur in the old world still reporting in real writing. Now, the second thing is, if I would have been a creative person, I would have reported something which could have not been told by the machine. So what I did, I told the story of actually staying in a Japanese restaurant when I was at the earthquake. And the restaurant was awful because it was purely American stuff. There was nothing which had to do with Japanese in spite of the food which still was served in the traditional manner. And so in the end, I just wrote a very little quote saying, this was the most original Japanese restaurant I ever was in because it had a real earthquake. And suddenly the whole story turned the other way around. So what I would like to learn is from you is looking at this computer-generated metaphors we are going to swallow. What are the strategies for creative writing in the future?
I mean, I think you've put your finger on one right there. It's my own editors ask me to, say something short, give us some facts, but I think this interpretive angle, how did you see it? what was your personal experience, and how does that story connect to other people? You know, we know that people react to that, they respond to that. We're all, you know, news media, for example, are always pushing a kind of pushing the emotional trigger. But I think, you know, being able to kind of be honest, give context to it. I mean, it's okay if you just said earthquake. It was big. People do that. That's, I mean, every act doesn't have to be an act of creativity. But I think making sure you had a conscious decision in your mind that I can tell something about this that other people can't. I've seen something about it, and maybe it was just to note for yourself. But I think those small acts and reactions kind of remind us what's important and what's critical. There may be other, you don't want your electric bill to be a 100-page story of the romance that the engineer is having at the electric plant. You just want the price and how much electricity you use. But I think that sort of reminding ourselves that that's important is key.
The people often speak about kind of new data journalists. Do you think that we all need more other skills, more technical skills in the journalism? All the journalists?
Data journalism is interesting because it's growing so quickly right now, and people coming through journalism school, that's the hot new course to study. It's critical, I think, because if more of the information they're taking in is going to be delivered technically, the sensor to the device, we have to understand how to actually handle that. We talk about like a rodeo, it's like being a wrangler. You have all this wild data that you have to sort of know how to shape, and not just be the one that writes the script to bypass yourself. So data journalism I think is critical. It's uncovering many things we didn't know about the world around us, and taking things we thought we did know factually and giving them a new context. But I think they have to remember that there's journalism in data journalism as well, that the key is to be good enough to tell a story creatively and evocatively and connect with readers through that data.
We have, like, if you say that there are more and more computers just creating content, do we need like a new, we have in German like over 50 years, it's kind of Pressekodex, it's like a codex for the journalist. Do you think that we need like a codex for computer or for robots?
I think, you know, journalism, media law will have to adjust in some ways, because if someone writes a program that then generates an insult that's libelous or slanderous to someone, you know, who's to blame? We don't know who to take to court right now. We don't know who to put in jail or how to investigate. And I think law is probably going to be the last thing to catch up. But in the meantime, the fact that it's sort of moving like the Wild West doesn't mean we can kind of just say, oh, it's technology, it's a new world, let's just let it go.
There's another question.
Thanks for that. I'm not quite sure I share your optimism. I think it was fascinating what you said, and you're probably right about this. I also agree with you that there is a space for or need for creativity, but I don't just share your optimism. The business, the executive suite, seeing it the same way. Which is why my question is there any data on, you know, new niches that have opened up for more creative journalism, for looking at things from a different angle, from a more interesting angle, you know, other products you can sell. I mean, one interesting example that pops to my mind is the New York Review of Books, which has just celebrated 50 years. But that's just a one-off, you know, that's Bob Silvers, who has the, you know, an idea of, you know, sending Timothy Snyder to cover the Ukraine. Mm-hmm. And then lots of people find that interesting, but there's, you know, one New Yorker, there's one New York Review of Books, there's one FT, and there's one Economist, and right. Maybe 10 more publications in the English-speaking world. But will these not just, you know, be shrunken? And if I may add on to that, isn't journalism maybe going the same way equality is? You know, the day maybe it was just, you know, a long century of unbiased, steadily more unbiased journalism, steadily more access to more people, and now we're just going the same way we're going globally with equality.
I think we're at a kind of strange moment to be looking at this, because there are, as I sort of pointed out, these, you know, emerging changes around the edges. There are also is a tremendous and very you could say sudden in a way, kind of level of interest and investment and experimentation happening in news. In the US alone, we've had multiple new startup media entities in the past 6 months. A lot of really smart young journalists are leaving the old institutions and going and doing the new thing. And I think they're trying to find, in most cases, they are trying to balance data and quick representations with the longer, more contextualized story. Vox is doing this, Vox.com, and trying to sort of take facts, which get lost in information in the media very often, and contextualize them and continue to refresh them. I've had a kind of debate with a colleague about whether that's sustainable, because it's easy to go back and refresh that data automatically. But providing context continues to be kind of critical and interesting, and I think as long as the world stays as strange and interesting as it is, we'll have stories to tell. But it's also, when I think about my own children, it's not just the kind of here and now. We can kind of throw a lifeline out in front of ourselves by making sure that we emphasize to people who are younger, who will be the media consumers and the creativity consumers of the future, what the difference is between cheap calories, sugar, and pure data without context, and the value of a deeper story that helps them kind of understand the experiences of other people.
Scott Smith, thank you so much for being here, and I hope we still need journalists in the future.
I hope so. Thank you.